We will call this meeting to order. This is the March 26th meeting of the Newcastle Planning Commission. I'm Charlie Gazik, Chair. We will begin with a flag salute. Would you please join me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Director Fitzgibbons, are you going to call the roll? I will note in advance that Commissioner Lowe is absent with excuse.
All right, Commissioner Keck. Here. Commissioner Van Natta.
I'm here.
Commissioner Blocker.
Here.
Vice Chair Troutman.
Yes, ma'am, here.
Chair Gadzik.
Here. We have a smaller commission today with one member absent and one seat unfilled. First item is the agenda approval. Would anyone like to make any changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will consider that approved. Next is approval of the minutes of our February 26th meeting. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, we'll consider that approved as well. That brings us to the public comment period. Individuals in the audience who would like to speak, it's now your turn to come up. You have 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and tell us where you live, and if you live in Newcastle, what neighborhood. Be sure to hit the microphone to make sure it's on.
I'll wait for you guys to have a copy of this document. I'm reading almost verbatim of this letter.
Charlie, do you want me to time these?
Yes, please do. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Planning Commission. My name is Bryce Given. I have been a Newcastle resident since 2008, and I believe I currently reside in the Hazelwood Terrace neighborhood. So Planning Commission, for new houses or the significant alteration of existing houses in single-family residential zones, Newcastle's current municipal code states that the sum of the side yards must be at least 15 feet. And this is, for example, 5 feet from the lot line on one side and 10 foot on the other side. The proposed code will modify this to allow for middle housing or one or more accessory dwelling units to abide by a 10-foot minimum side yard requirement, while single-family homes would still need to abide by the 15-foot sum requirement. And I agree with this. I recently had a talk with the city planner appointment, and it was suggested that I bring my interpretation of the application of this proposed code change to the attention of the Planning Commission. It is easy to understand the scenario of a parcel with an existing large single-family house where an ADU is added, and that ADU could be built to the requirements of the 10-foot side yard sum with the existing house. However, many of the existing homes in our older neighborhoods are not large. A parcel with an existing small single-family house that wanted to convert that small house into an ADU in order to build a larger single-family house adjacent to it should be able to do so to the same setback sum constraints as the parcel with the larger house that adds a smaller ADU. My request to the Planning Commission is to consider that the end result in both scenarios is the same, an ADU and a single-family house, and that the side yard sum requirements for both scenarios should be applied the same. I believe this interpretation is reasonable and in the spirit of making middle housing and ADUs more affordable, or more available, excuse me. So as an example, my 1960s home, excluding the uninsulated garage, is about 930 square feet in size, which is within the maximum 1,000 square foot size allowed for a new ADU. My parcel is also one of many that has a street frontage width of only 40 feet because it sits on one of approximately 130 cul-de-sacs in Newcastle. I would like to convert my existing home into an ADU and build a modest single-family home adjacent to it, and I would like to be able to do so with the same side yard sum requirements that are proposed to apply to a parcel already blessed with a large single-family home with an ADU to be added. The end result, an ADU on a single-family house, is the same. Thank you, and I've included at the very footnote copies of the codes that I've cited. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
I wasn't sure if we were still doing public comment. I walked in a little late. I didn't hear the beginning of the meeting. Good evening. My name is Carol Simpson. I live in the Lakeview at Newcastle Apartments, which is the furthest west parcel in the city of Newcastle, and I'm the only one designated high density. I'm a former planning commissioner from 1999 to 2007, and a city council member from 2008 until 1999. Now I'm pleased to address you as a person, a resident of Newcastle. While there is not a specific rule, by tradition and decorum, Newcastle council members have refrained from public comment or even attendance at planning commission meetings. Sometimes council members attend meetings of citizen advisory bodies and wish to speak, but this can be problematic due to the influence that a board or council members have. If a council member does appear and speak before a commission meeting, they must participate in a manner that will not intimidate, unduly influence, or inhibit the members, meetings, or operations of the board or commission. Why would a council member need to express their opinion to the planning commission? Council members can express their opinion and have the final vote at council level. I value that you are 7 more opinions from a diverse group of Newcastle residents representing various neighborhoods, lifestyles, age groups, families, income levels, and points in your life. I value your opinions. Oftentimes when council is adopting new development regulations, no one shows up to offer their opinions. Zoning code language is not very sexy stuff. But once the bulldozers show up, people get riled up. By then, it's too late. The actions you take in recommending zoning regulations that guide the development of our city are very important. Please learn and understand our zoning code and how it works and how it implements the comprehensive plan. It is important that you offer your opinions based on your fully digesting the information provided in the agenda packets, and sometimes even adding your own research. Do look further for input and explanation of the issues before you. You are residents of Newcastle. You live and play and work here. The staff does not. You are the experts on our city. The staff is your coordinator who supports your work and hires consultants for technical needs and offers guidance in legal matters. When it comes to your vision for the future of our city, you are the final say in advice and recommendations to the planning commission, planning to the city council. My apologies for flubbing up the last word. Your recommendation is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, we'll close the public comment period and move to commissioner comment. And tonight, let's go from, is that west to east? Starting with Commissioner Blocker, would you like to make a comment? Commissioner Van Etta?
Just quickly, it's good to be here with you guys, and I appreciate the people in the audience. It's nice to see people that are interested enough to show up and take part in this. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And I'd like to say thanks also, and I will say to, I'd like to get your name, Mr. Niven, I think, but Given, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I think that's a point that we would have missed, and I think it's one that we need to give serious consideration. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I have some thoughts about the question of council members appearing at commission meetings and offering their opinion. I did some research on this to find out what the law and ethics of it required, and what I came across was something by a body that I couldn't tell you the name of it, but it is a nonpartisan research group that's dedicated to informing cities about the best way of doing business. And the explanation provided by this organization said that there are two types of activities that a body like ours can be involved in. One is a legislative activity, and that is what the comprehensive plan activity was. The other is a quasi-judicial activity, and that's not one that I think we would rarely get involved in that. That's when we would be deciding, for example, to approve an application by somebody. And the way our commission is set up, those questions don't come to us. In the first example, the legislative activity, there is nothing in law or ethics that says that a council member can't come before us and speak his or her opinion. It would be a different matter if it was a quasi-judicial matter, but that wasn't the case. And I guess I would say personally, I appreciate knowing what our council members think. I have had conversations with the commission about how do we regard the opinions of the council. I'm not sure if that conversation occurred with all of the current commissioners present, but my advice to them was that our job is to provide the best recommendation that we can to the council. The council can do whatever it wants with our recommendation, and the opinion of an individual council member is just that person's opinion. There's no way to predict how the council is going to act on any matter. So I was encouraging the commission then, and I encourage you now to take that approach toward whatever we hear from our council members. It's good to know they are some of the most informed and active members of our community. So their opinion counts. But our opinion and what we recommend should be what we think is the best, regardless of what those members say. And as to whether or not we are unduly influenced by them, unduly influenced by our staff, I haven't seen that in the last few meetings. I think the commissioners have acted quite independently. They've followed their own star. But I do agree that we are experts on the city of Newcastle, and it is our job to think about this independently, to look at what we receive from the staff critically and thoughtfully, and factor that in along with everything else that we think about when we make a decision. Okay. We'll go to reports. I don't have a report, but I will offer the development director an opportunity.
I don't have much of a comment. I think I'll just let you all know what's kind of coming down the pike now instead of later. So we have obviously middle housing, affordable housing this year. We have probably we'll start looking at our critical areas ordinance in the middle of the year. We're right now planning for three meetings plus a hearing on that, and hopefully we'll adopt it before budget season with council. Then we'll have to look at our zoning map, make sure that it's compliant with the future land use map, which for the most part it is. I think there's one parcel that we might need to change, so that should be a pretty simple meeting. And then the last thing that we might actually start looking at again this year is small cells, which has come in and out of existence for the last, 3 years or so. So anyway, that's what I'm anticipating at this point. And if you have any questions about any of those, let me know.
Do you have any questions? Okay, thank you, Director Fitzgibbons. We have no public hearing tonight, so we'll move to general business and Associate Planner Coyle.
Right there, thanks everybody. So I have where's my PowerPoint? Oh, there you are. Can I get this in a full screen? How do I get it on this one? Just go to full screen. Oh, that's what I did, yeah.
Go to slideshow. Oh, turn off the presenter.
Ah, thank you. Is there a reason why? I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure why it's. Yeah, why is it doing that? Could I just go to full screen? No. Yeah, that's bizarre. Well, I could go through like this. I'm not sure why it's blocking me. Well, sorry everyone. I'm not sure why it. Yeah, not sure why it doesn't want me to go into presenter mode, but here we are. That's it. All right, everyone. So let's see. I have a little presentation prepared tonight to go through the numerous code changes that are proposed. And so because there's so much, I think there's some need to break it up and understand first where this is coming from. So I want to give a brief overview of the state laws and requirements that are the source of these changes, and then go into a little bit more depth on what some of those requirements specifically mean for middle housing, accessory dwelling units, unilot subdivision, and some areas where we could selectively exceed those requirements. And then I would like to go through the code change tracker spreadsheet that I've come up with, because we do have all the code changes in a Word doc, but the Word doc is cumbersome to the point of not being useful in a typical meeting. And so to go through the code change tracker and discuss the items that we have the most control over changing first, and then of course any others that you guys would specifically like to discuss, we also could. And then I would propose that we take a short break, or at least there's a break in the presentation. We could just cruise through it, and then discuss the affordable housing options. And I am proposing to discuss the affordable housing options separately from the other changes, because they're qualitatively different, and we have a lot more flexibility on what it is that we do or don't do with the affordable housing stuff. So I think it makes a certain amount of sense to have them be separate, at least in our discussion. And so with that, I would like to just get on into it. So state laws and actions, maybe you've heard, but it's been busy times in Olympia for the past 2-3 years now. And so the laws that we're primarily responding to are HB 1110 and HB 2123, which together are the middle housing law, or laws allowing middle housing. And in Newcastle, that's going to mean that duplexes will have to be allowed in all currently single-family zones. And it also includes language limiting on how cities can regulate this middle housing, which, again, we've discussed what that is before fundamentally, but things that are bigger than a single-family detached house and smaller than a mid-rise apartment building. Where Newcastle will be focusing on is on the lower end of that, generally in duplexes, although we also have allowed cottage housing in Newcastle since 2008, and so we would be updating those regulations as well. And I wanted to specifically call that out because that code has not been used very much, and so you might not be aware that we have allowed it since that time. So we also have to create a process called unit lot subdivision in there as a part of that bill. And unit lot subdivision is interesting in that it's a way of changing the ownership structure of what you could build on land, but it doesn't actually create more, you can't build more structures because of a unit lot subdivision. And we'll get to that later because it's a fine point and it's different in some ways from a traditional subdivision. Then we have HB 1337, which is the ADU legislation that specifies that up to 2 ADUs can be built on lots on single-family zones. They can be saleable, and cities are not allowed to require that the owner lives on site, which we currently do. There are other changes, but it will take too long to go into every single one. And then this is a small fraction of the total changes here, but for HB 1220 and HB 1998, HB 1220, if you recall step housing from the comprehensive plan, these are minor code changes meant to specify that the shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing are buildable in Newcastle. This is going to happen whether we change our code or not. It's just will state code override or not.
When would you like questions? Do you want us to wait until you've gone through the presentation, or you want questions throughout?
I had imagined going through, but there's kind of a lot here. So would you guys prefer to go questions throughout? We certainly could.
Commissioners? Yes, we will.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a question regarding HB 1220 and the step housing allowed without a conditional use permit.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What is the practical implication of that? Does that mean that that housing isn't subject to any other requirements other than different than a duplex would, or apartment building if it were of that size?
It would be regulated like a duplex would or an apartment building of that size in a given zone. So no particular regulations that are tailored to it being a step housing development. It would just be whatever anything else of that size would be subject to. I would need to go back and look at the exact code. We might have some small flexibility to set bounds, but we are limited, so we couldn't do a conditional use permit. It will have to be by right, and I know that there are limits to how much we can restrict for that type of housing. I'm not remembering exactly whether it has to be exactly the same standard off the top of my head right now.
Well, we can come back to that
Whether
later.
the step housing has to have exact, no more requirements than what you could otherwise build in the zone. Yeah, we should probably come back on that.
So the statement more onerous regulations, like onerous how? Onerous in fees for permits or setbacks? Like what, I need to find that.
The number one thing that the state law is going after is design requirements. In the past, and our old cottage housing code is a good example of this. If you were to look through our present cottage housing code, there would be numerous requirements on like the pitch of the roof on the cottages, that each cottage has to be like architecturally a little bit distinct from the one next to it, that you have to have porches of a certain size. And all of those things only apply to cottage housing. We wouldn't be able to apply those kinds of standards anymore without applying them also to single-family houses. So it's not to say that you can't have any design standards, it's to say that you can't put extra design requirements on middle housing or on ADUs that you wouldn't also be willing to put on a single-family house. And so we actually do have some design requirements that we are proposing here. We have some flexibility on exactly what we do, but the point of those would be to try to encourage and ensure we get development that matches kind of the feel and the rhythm of single-family development, and that, yes, it applies to single-family development as well, but they're the sort of things that are traditionally done anyway. And so you wouldn't see much real-world impact on a single-family development. So that's how we're thinking about that
Okay.
provision right now.
Okay, thank you.
So HB 1998, so is this, what did we have before, prior to this? And I'm just trying to understand, it says cities must allow co-living where 6 or more multifamily residential units are permitted. Did we, prior to HB 9, was this a law in effect previously as well, or is this a new one?
This is a new one. I don't believe that our code allowed co-living at all. Like, it would have been, the definitions were a little different under the old code, but I think they were referred to as micro units, and I do not think that they were allowed. Yeah. A 6 or more. I think the state phrased it that way so that it would apply to multifamily housing or multifamily zones as opposed to single-family zones.
So in Newcastle, the practical implication would be anywhere that there is R24 zoning or above, or we have mixed-use zoning and we have the downtown zoning. So that's where those kinds of units could occur.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about preemption, because these housing bills are a little bit unusual in the way that they were passed and written and to be enforced. So both HB 1110 and 1337 are required for implementation by the end of June this year, and the way they go about it is a little bit different. So for 1337, we have to get our ADU code consistent with state law, or our laws will be overridden by state code. At that point, somebody going for an application for an ADU would actually be citing the RCWs themselves, which the RCWs aren't exactly designed to handle that. They're not the same thing as a fully developed zoning code, and so you can do it. We would have to do it, but it's not a natural fit. Just as a legislative vehicle, it's not really meant to apply to projects, and so that's our push. For ADUs to get our standards updated. For the middle housing, I think there was some understanding that what they're asking for is fundamentally more complicated. And so when they passed the law, they required the Department of Commerce to create a model housing ordinance for middle housing. And this thing is interesting because if you don't get your code passed by the start of July, then this code becomes your middle housing code until you pass laws, until you align your own standards with the state law. And so this, this code will override your code anywhere they conflict. It'll override your your Plain City Code, so the municipal code. It'll override your public works standards. If your fire department has a different code, it's going to override that. It will rule. And another interesting thing is that there are pieces from the code. If you were to open the model ordinance, you would see some words are in bold, and those are things that need to be in any compliant state code or any compliant code around the state. And then there are things that are not in bold. And those things are all optional if you have a code that is compliant with the state law. But if you don't comply with state law, they go into force. And that is put in there to try to make it so that the state doesn't end up getting horror stories for people to go on the model code. They build out the code and make it more workable in some ways, but they also, you end up having to take on more obligation if you don't get your laws passed by taking on all of those other things that otherwise wouldn't be required. So that none of that is very traditional for how for new rules coming down, and it's designed principally to get cities moving and make delay difficult to impossible. These code updates are any code updates that are implementing these laws are exempt from SEPA and Growth Management Act challenges. That's also unusual. And so our goal here is to our goal with these code amendments is to get Newcastle certified compliant by the State Department of Commerce prior to that deadline, so we keep full control over our regulations continuously. If there's a period of time where we're under those regulations and somebody applies, then they get to stay with, or they don't get to, they have to stay with whatever the regulations were on the day they applied. So you'd have however many permits coming through under that other system, and then we'd do 3 permits like that and never again. Let's see. Going into the proposed code changes, this is the breakdown of the whole number of changes that I've proposed. And the point of this here is just to show that middle housing, unit lot subdivision, which is a part of middle housing, and then the ADUs together are about 90% of your proposed code changes. When I made this pie, I did not include the affordable housing provisions because those are kind of a different animal and that they're all optional. And we'll talk more about that later. But the breakdown here is really the ADU and middle housing legislation is driving it, and then the step housing and co-living are relative footnotes. So to get into the middle housing a little bit more, there are more details in the laws than this, but we're trying to keep it to a slide. So we need to allow duplexes on all conforming lots in single-family zones. We don't need to put them in critical areas or in other areas that are just unbuildable right now. So we get to all of that stays the same. But if you have a buildable lot, you need to be able to put a duplex on it. We don't have to regulate middle housing, or we cannot regulate middle housing any more strictly than single-family detached housing, which goes back to those the design bits I mentioned earlier. We can't have parking requirements within a half mile of the future transit stop on I-405. The state code says major transit stops, but that is until sometime in 2050 or beyond, the BRT line comes down Coal Creek Parkway. The only one that meets that definition in the city is the one going in by the highway. It's not actually going to impact very many buildable lots in Newcastle. I mean, you can imagine where that stop is. You've got the stop and then the road and then the hill, and then there's where people actually live further up. That one won't be too impactful here. And then we'll have to adopt the unit lot subdivision process. Beyond that, we could allow denser types of middle housing, so that could be triplex, quadplex, sixplex, and some of those may be appropriate in Newcastle in zones where we already allow that development intensity, just not in that package. So that could be the neighborhood business zone by the Shell station. Maybe you could have a triplex there. Maybe you could have a sixplex in downtown Transition, which already allows for things of that intensity or greater. But that is one area that we could potentially exceed the state law's requirements. And let's see, we can make our code less restrictive than state law. And we have the ability to require affordable housing under just a standing provision from a different law that allows you to put in affordable housing requirements, but only when they're paired with an upzone. We happen to have an upzone in front of us right now, so we have the option if we want to. Accessory dwelling units. So we must allow up to 2 ADUs per lot in single-family zones, not require that the landowner live on the site, allow units to be sold, and limit height and bulk restrictions. So we could also make our code less restrictive than the law. And when I say limit height restrictions, the minimum height we could impose is 24 feet, which is roughly aligns with what you'd call 1.5-story house. I have a picture here actually of a like an ADU plan for a 1.5-story house. So you can see that it's, you know, as far as the occupant's concerned, it's 2 stories, but it's shorter. This would be, I didn't check that this picture off the internet is 24 feet, but our code would be 24 feet, and this house would likely comply with it. And that's versus our current 30-foot limit, which we could discuss that now. We could discuss that later. It's going to come up in the code change tracker. Another thing is we could allow for slightly smaller setbacks from ADUs on smaller lots, which is another topic that's already come up, and I might want to hang on to that until we're getting to it in the code change tracker. So unit lot subdivision. It is a way to subdivide the ownership of land. And you say, well, that's all subdivision, isn't it? Well, yes, but it allows you to essentially, it works almost like a lot split, but it's not quite the same. So it is a way, it doesn't allow you to build more density on a given piece of land than you already could. So say you have a 7,500 square foot parcel of land, and you were going to put a duplex on this parcel. You could use a unit lot subdivision to split that duplex in half and sell each side fee simple. But you didn't actually gain the ability to build any more units on the site for it. It was just more of a financial vehicle so that you could sell them fee simple versus setting up a condo association. And because of that, so they're not a way to put extra units or density on site, which is a big difference from a traditional subdivision. It just allows people to assign ownership to units that they were already able to build. So within that framework, you have parent lots, which are larger pieces of land, often traditional single-family lots, also could be tracts. And then you have child lots or unit lots, which are drawn within the parent lots. Child lots can run through structures. And none of the dimensional standards that we put on a house typically, well, not none, the height still applies, but the setback requirements, the lot coverage standards, all of that applies at the parent lot level, but that gives you lots of flexibility at the unit lot level. Unit lots can violate those standards so long as the whole parent lot is compliant. And I have a picture here. This is from Bellevue. So on the right, you can see more of a traditional single-family home setup, and then on the left, you have a unit lot subdivision here, and you can see how these parcels line up very tightly with the houses. So what this is doing here is allowing these people to own their homes fee simple. It will get them out then of having the condo, or you could have an HOA fee, but the need to have an HOA on this is the same as having an HOA in Olympus. Yeah, go ahead.
So in the picture here, are those shared wall structures like townhouses or are
Some,
they?
some are and some are not. And the beauty of the unit lot subdivision is it doesn't care. You can, so on the left here between 305 and 341, you can see that we have one townhouse building, and that is separate from the one above it, and the unit lots run through the building and they run between the buildings. They really run wherever they need to run to encompass a dwelling unit and give that person the ownership over the dirt under their feet. Whenever you have a setup like this, your access and utilities tend to be owned either in common or more likely by easement. And so you could park on site. You could also park, maybe you have a clustered parking that's behind the house or something, and everyone has an easement access to their space. I personally actually live in a unit lot subdivision townhouse, so I understand how these things work on a personal level at this point.
So you can have multiple owners on what was a parent lot at one time. From a taxing standpoint, are those individual taxable parcels?
That is correct. So the interesting thing is that to the tax assessor, it looks like a traditional subdivision because you are creating new tax lots. But to the planner or the builder, I just took something I was able to build anyway and I split it up differently. And so that's one of the advantages here is that the developer doesn't have to go through the condominium process, and then the future owner of the house doesn't have to pay the extra fees that come with the condominium setup. So that is unit lot subdivision in a nutshell. And yeah,
Yeah, so, what I'm noticing is on the right, the property lines go all the way to the sidewalk. But on the left, they stop kind of just past the front door. So on the left, it looks like the driveway is the front yards, even that street and that parking area up top maybe are owned in common, perhaps?
I think that they would be owned in common. I will say that it's not inherent to unit lot subdivision that the boundaries stopped where they did. For example, my townhouse has a little front yard. I own it out to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So that decision-making would have been between the city of Bellevue and the applicant, and I'm sure that they had their reasons for drawing their lines there, but they could have been drawn where they were, or they could have been drawn at the street. But everything in between is going to be owned in common.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I
So who made
that's
that
private.
comment?
Well, I think that you would, it would be like an HOA typically. And one thing that I've seen on these sites is that they try to minimize the amount of area that's owned in common, specifically to make that easy. But yeah, you would have an HOA take care of that.
So all the three guys on the bottom end of the picture there say, yeah, it's his job down there to mow the grass.
Personally, I would not want a development of this size without an HOA for exactly that reason.
I do have one more serious question. So maybe I'm jumping ahead, I don't know. So this unit lot subdivision, can that also be applied then to ADUs that are in the backyard of the parent?
Indeed, it can.
Okay, so I'm
And
jumping ahead.
I think it's a good question for right now. So, yes, it is a way for people to be able to own their ADUs as well. Same situation as here. That's just it's a alternative to condominiumizing, and it really works just the same way. It turns out the financial process doesn't really care whether it's splitting a building in half or going through dirt. And then the practicalities of how you do that in real life kind of get handled by the building code. So like, does there need to be a firewall here, for example? Are these two buildings far enough apart that they don't need extra fire protection? Those are things that the building code is set up to handle.
Quick
Where-
question.
Commissioner Keck and then Vice Chair Talman.
So just to confirm, this is, even though it smells like a condominium, but it is actually going to be like townhomes, because you say it's fee simple, so they own it. But if it's going to be tenancy in common, how are the property taxes? Is going to be jointly paid monthly? Is that how, that's how we do with condominiums, for instance? Is that how it'll be?
So in my experience, I pay my taxes, I think it's biannually in an escrow account. And it works really just the same as if I were in a single-family detached house with just its own lot. They're really, for tax purposes, they really are treated more like single-family detached lots than a condo. And actually, there is one other difference between a condo and a ULS that I need to mention, and that is that this process does not stack. If you want to put two units on top of each other, unit lot subdivision can't handle that. And so it would not be appropriate for an ADU that's built over a garage in an existing house, because just the legal mechanism apparently cannot handle it. But whenever they are separated horizontally, this process can work.
Under this arrangement, Tyler, it looks like these are immune or not subject to minimum open space requirements.
So.
Can you address that, please?
Yeah, so the kind of neat thing about unilot subdivision is that all of your requirements just get applied at the parent lot level. And so you still have your open space, your lot coverage requirements, your setbacks, all of that still apply as far as somebody on the outside is concerned, or I guess for the open space requirements as a resident is concerned. But they apply at that larger development level. So it still gets addressed. It's just that if you look too closely, it might look like it's not.
So could you identify where the parent lot is in some of this ULS stuff? I mean, there's like, take like 341.917.5. Is that all the parent lot, or
So
how do you identify what the parent lot is then and what the open space was requirement was for that?
So this, again, because this is in another jurisdiction, it's a little hard for me to say exactly what they did. I get the sense that this parent lot was actually very large at the beginning, and that it might be somewhere, it could well be essentially that whole stretch, and the green space actually continues to the north and the west here, and it might have been that entire thing.
Almost a cottage development then.
Yeah, this is almost like it is almost like a cottage development. I'd be interested to have known the story of how this particular one got developed, because you could. It's not so cottagey to have the driveway right in the middle like that, but the general arrangement is not so different from cottage housing. And it's possible that they got it there under Bellevue's cottage housing code, but I would really need to go and ask someone there. All right, glad I put that picture in there. It doesn't make sense when it's just words. So the step living and co-housing, this is essentially just a repeat of what we've already said. Co-living are where multiple units can share a kitchen. They need to be allowed in multifamily zones. I'm a little bit dubious about how attractive any of this is going to be economically in Newcastle, but that's also a rehashing of our comprehensive plan conversation on the same topic. But I can get back to you guys on what exactly the state law is required, like where exactly the state law lets us get up to in terms of regulating step housing. Um, Yeah, probably after this meeting, though. I'm gonna need to do just a little bit of research. But yeah.
Could I ask, am I correct in understanding that currently in Newcastle in the R1 through 6 zone, co-living housing is not authorized, not,
That's correct, and that should remain the case. So this would only apply in your multifamily zones, so downtown transition, R24, mixed use, downtown core.
so while
Probably
I've
that would be
struggled
good.
with all the jammed up parking on the street for my neighbor's house who's doing this, I shouldn't have had to deal with that.
It's possible that your neighbor is renting out to many different people,
On a continuum.
but I wouldn't say that they came to the city and got a permit for that. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's coming from a permitting process at the city.
Well, we have to replace a fence and joint, so I'm not gonna piss him off yet.
Okay, so I want to talk about the code change tracker a little bit because as I put these red lines in our code, I realized that putting it, just relying on the Word doc was going to be incredibly unwieldy. And so while we do have that, and we can look at the code in context as much or as little as we need to, I created a code change tracking spreadsheet that is similar in spirit to the one that we had in the comp plan to show how the old plan's goals and policies lined up with the new plans. And so kind of borrowing that idea, I set all of every proposed change in the code, said what the old code was, what the new code was, a thought on why it needed to be there, if it was legislatively required. It was marked requirement, and I cited the as specific as I could code that was making it happen. So those are everything marked requirement. Then everything that is called requirement consistency are things that are required by the substance of a law, and I do cite the codes when I have one of those, but the exact wording we have a little bit more flexibility on. And so there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but again, very, very little. There are a couple requirement consistencies that could be removed. They're the 4 or 5 that are marked with that in the code that don't have a specific law backing them up. Those are all there just for interpretability's sake. So they're things that are just sort of like needed for the code to be logically consistent. So you would remove them, but you could remove them, but at the cost of interpretability. And then there is quality, which is the name that I needed to give for things that we actually could change. We could totally do, not do, or do differently. I think we've got roughly 30 of these. And so those are the ones that I'm hoping to go through here. And yeah, let's just start on that now. So is everyone ready? Should I just dive into it? Or do
Is this document the same one that you sent out to us
Yes.
Tuesday or Monday?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so,
So let me
okay.
offer a suggestion. You may not have to go through all of these. I'll ask the commission if you want an explanation on each one, or do you want to just take them one at a time? But if you don't have any concerns or you don't have any questions, we won't ask Tyler to comment on them. What do you think? Okay. So if you get no comment, I think you can assume that we approve the change notes, or we approve the proposed code that you're proposing.
Okay, so that sounds good. So the way that I have this done here is that I've got in the quality section, first things to do with ADUs, and then things to do with middle housing, and then it's kind of, descending by topic. But I don't know, maybe that's not so important here. Let's just get going. So the first one, 1831-030B, the old code was that the accessory dwelling unit or the land on which the accessory dwelling unit is, well, actually, I'll just give the number.
There you go.
Do we want to discuss this one?
If there's something that you think that isn't captured in the notes that we should understand, feel free. But if there's nothing that you need to say beyond what you've already said, just say the number and see if anybody has anything to weigh in on.
Oh, yeah, I'll zoom in a bit. Okay, then 1831-030B, going once. All right. 1831-030F. This is the heights clause that I mentioned earlier. All right. 1831-030H.
I have a question on that, and it looks like
Let's
Commissioner
go
Blocker
through
does
this.
too.
Yes.
My question is, how much parking is currently required for a primary dwelling unit that does not have an ADU?
So a primary unit that does not have an ADU would be 2 spaces, 2 off-street parking spaces are required now. Spaces in the garage and enough space to hold the car in the driveway can also both count. In our current code, because ADUs are wholly not separate from the main house, instead of saying, here's your parking requirement for an ADU, it says that the main house will have a parking requirement of 3. That's an implied 1 per ADU, and so I'm proposing to just keep that logic going and have 1 per each new ADU. I will say that under state code, we have the flexibility on lots over 6,000 feet to require 2 parking spaces per accessory dwelling unit. I do have, and there's a bit of a balance there, right? Because on the one side, we recognize that most people in Newcastle have cars, and we don't want them all pouring out on the street. But at the same time, people in Newcastle value their green space and the look and feel that comes with that. And so I'm a little worried about if we require too many parking spaces, because one single family house with 2 ADUs, a 2 per ADU, now we have 6 parking spaces on a single family lot, and the whole thing might just get a little bit concrete-y for people's tastes. It might not go well with the aesthetic of the community, so that's why the one is.
Would they be able to meet the open space requirement in doing that? 6 on a parent lot? You wouldn't meet the, like you just said, it'd be a little concrete-y. That wouldn't meet the open space, would it?
I mean, you may be able, so you have a garage, you put 2 in there, you have a traditional driveway, we allow tandem in our code, so that could be another 2, and then you put 2 on the side. It would be a challenge to be able to build everything out. And so I think it's kind of a maybe that you could meet it with 2. I think that it would make our code difficult to implement, and that we would not be an architect's friend, trying to keep our current lot coverage, our current impervious coverage standard of 40%, which we're not proposing to change, while also having 6 spaces on the lot. It does become a challenge, which is why I'm proposing the 1, so that we have 4 spaces on the lot rather than 6.
Plus 3 roofs.
Potentially, and those roofs will all get under the 35% requirement that we have now.
So what do we need to do?
I would either agree or disagree with what I've written.
I guess the question is, do the commissioners agree that 1 parking spot per ADU is appropriate? And remember that our maximum size ADU is 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, I agree with the 1 ADU. But I don't know if that's right. I just have just general parking questions. Can I ask them now?
Okay.
So imagine you're standing in a street and you're looking at a house, two-car garage on the right and the rest of the house over here on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody adds an ADU over the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Where can they put that one parking spot?
So our code will, the parking spaces in the driveway can also count. So you could have 2 in the garage and then 1 in the driveway.
So their existing driveway could potentially count for the ADU.
Probably
Okay.
would.
Can they put a parking spot on the left in the front yard?
I believe that they could. I'm trying to remember, it doesn't get proposed very often.
I'm not saying it's the best looking thing, I'm just
Do
trying
they
to.
have to demonstrate that they can use the garage, that it's not full of stored stuff?
What you do with your garage once you have it is up to the owner. I don't, no, we wouldn't require that the garage be free and clear, or else you're gonna need to hire some more code enforcement people.
Len and I use our garages.
Yeah, so the Public Works requires 5 feet from the edge of driveway to the lot line.
Right.
So you couldn't pave all the way to the lot line, but you could, if you have enough impervious surface, you could,
Widen it.
yeah. Our requirement for parking is on a approved impervious surface, so like concrete, sometimes gravel, although we prefer not gravel.
So then, how wide does a parking spot have to be? What's the width?
Like 8 feet or something.
Says 8 in the code stuff in here. 8 by 20.
That sounds right.
Okay, so now if you're looking at that same house and they have 10 feet on the right and then the 5 feet setback on the left, so they have the 15 feet. You with me?
For the house setback. Mm-hmm.
Can they park a car in that 10 feet on the right? In the 8 feet?
They can pave up to 5 feet from, for a drive area, they could pave up to 5 feet from the side setback.
So they only have 10, so
From
they
the
can only
side
take
line.
5, so they wouldn't have enough space to put it in the side yard. 'Cause they only have 10 feet on that side.
Right, oh, I'm sorry what you're saying. Yeah, they would have to utilize some of the space that's already there, so hoping they have a wider
A wider setback.
driveway than what,
Okay.
isn't it?
Couldn't they gravel it, park on gravel, even in that 10 feet?
Not,
That would still, I mean, we wouldn't approve that with a,
For the
like
permit,
for a new home.
for the permit.
Yes, people do things that we don't know about, but.
and I guess my last question, same house, you're looking at the 2-car driveway. Let's say they could put a spot off to the right, next to the property line. Can they enter it via the existing driveway and turn in? Or do they need to cut the curb and make their own driveway?
No, they could keep the curb at, what typically is just 20 feet, they could keep it at that width, or
Okay.
10 feet, whatever it is.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, while we're on this though, if you got, say that person really loved curb cuts and wanted to put 2 driveways, would you allow, like, would you be in favor of allowing that? Because it is a question of do we want to encourage driveway consolidation?
And just a side note on that, even if you say yes, Public Works might say no, and we might have to come back to you on that one. But, yeah.
Right, we have to work with Public Works for everything for the access, but that's something that I'd be a little bit skittish about if somebody wanted to have 2 driveways on each side, or 1 driveway on each side. Yeah, depending on lot width, right. Oh, so this is the juicy one. We have a definition of a fiveplex. Come back. Um, 1806-241. Does anyone want to talk about this definition of a fiveplex? Okay, 1806, 274.
Could I ask about the fiveplex?
Sure.
What do we do about parking with them?
So that would be, whatever we would do there would go in the, probably downtown transition or, what is it, like downtown transition or mixed-use zone, standards. And so we would we'd probably handle the parking however those codes are already set up to. The point of putting this definition in there is that if we were going to allow a fiveplex in a zone that was already dense enough, already permitted enough density to allow it, then it stands to reason that we should have a definition of what a fiveplex is. That's the same logic for the fourplex and the sixplex. Okay. Are we good?
Are we good through row H then? Sixplex. Okay, good.
1808030A, use table change allowing duplexes in urban residential zones.
Good to go.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
So our flexibility here is actually coming on the higher end. It could well be that, so we have to allow duplexes in those lower density zones. The question is it a good idea to or to not allow a duplex in the more intense zone? Thought being that maybe there's a higher and better use, to use real estate speak, for that land with the more intensive zoning. So actually, would you, as it is, it would be proposed to allow up to R24, but would you guys want to keep that or maybe to slim it down more towards the single-family zones?
Well, can you bring up that use table in general? Like it was page 79 in the, it's 1808. Oh, God, you're good.
Yes. So, first off, is everybody familiar with it, what a use table is and how it works in our code? I should really, so, yes, for anyone that doesn't stare at these every day, a use table is a table that is pretty much every city has in theirs, or most cities have in their zoning codes, that says exactly what can be done in each of the zones. They're quite long, they cover a large number of uses, and sometimes they can be quite exact on what they're allowing. But you can kind of think of this as the back end of the zoning map in some ways. That when you see, a DT or a DC sitting in the middle, what exactly does that mean? What exactly is allowed here? The use table is one of the main places where we go and find that out. So this is the residential section of the use table. If I were to go down, I would, what is, don't mind that. We're not changing that. That's a fluke. But, so what this would show here is, this would show the duplex being permitted use in R1 through 6 and then R12 through 24. I do question whether 12 through 24 is starting to be a bad allocation of that land.
Suppose there is a small lot in one of these zones and you couldn't build anything bigger than a duplex. Why wouldn't you want to allow it?
Well, that is a good question. If my thought would be that if you had a small lot, you still might be better off trying to push towards a 5 or a 6plex, even if it's going to go with smaller units and in a stacked configuration. just because that unit would still ultimately be more valuable to the city from a tax standpoint, and also from one of the reasons that we want to cluster population down there is that it helps to drive business in the area. And it can specifically help with those local serving smaller businesses to keep them stable. So I would think, like, is there anything else that could be done with this? Sure.
I think it might help to see what's currently zoned R24, because most of that is in the downtown with the exception of the, on the west side of the city. But all of those lots are fairly large, so it's that kind of burgundy wine color that you see.
Yeah. This R12 is a little bit funky. It has a lot of, there's like some stormwater detention facilities in critical areas there. It's a little,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd actually like to know the history of why that R12 zone is there.
I think they wanted to.
So it may be good for me to note, while we're looking at this, that we have, as far as buildable capacity in all of these zones, thanks to the overwhelming success of the Newcastle Commons, there's not much left in MUR. There's a little, there's some left in the DT zone. They tend to be the water line side across the street is our white whale, and then we have some smaller parcels that could potentially be redeveloped. We have this larger site here, which in the MU zone we have the Aegis Senior Living facility, and this is all critical areas. Yeah, this is a wonderful little boardwalk in wetlands. And the R24 zone is also pretty developed at this point. So where most of your potential could come from these zones would be from redevelopment. Say the QFC ever went away downtown, and somebody wanted to redevelop that. That's where the vast majority of the capacity available in those zones is, and they do tend to be larger pieces of land, or pieces of land that are owned, several of them at once by the same owner, which is, you can see in the QFC here. I think this is the same owner owning several of these, not all, but a couple.
Tyler, what's the R12, the orange wedge down there to the east of Coal Creek?
So
Isn't that stormwater pond?
yes, we think maybe in the past there was some potential for multifamily down there, but it's obviously not today.
I don't think there's a pond there.
Houseboats?
I don't think there's a pond there. I live a couple blocks away from there, and I just turn at the intersection, so I don't walk over there, but I think it's just some flat land at the bottom of the hill, and it's an odd-shaped lot, but there's a wetland across the street, and there's stormwater pond further down by the Regents, but I don't think there's any pond there.
Well, there are some very small facilities that are actually maintained by Public Works on the east side of Coal Creek Parkway. I forget if one of them is actually in the R12 zone. I thought that it was, but I could be misremembering. Oh, go away. But we also have a hillside on the eastern side of this lot. So you have, it's difficult to develop. You may have some steep slopes in part of that area. I think that there is some developable land in R12, but it's very questionable whether there's enough to build more than a small set of cottages, at least from my reconnaissance of the place.
So in that particular place, it might make sense to allow duplexes there.
I think if you could fit it, then I think you could justify putting duplexes there.
And right now, the way your proposal is, you could not, it's not a permitted use for a duplex there, is it?
Actually, the way it's written now, it is a permitted or the duplex is a permitted use.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
And
Is that the only R12 in the city?
this is actually a lot, this is an area we're gonna be talking about for the zone map change this year to downzone it to R6 because the R12 doesn't actually seem to be feasible. It seems to be a remnant of something, but, but yes.
Yes.
Yep.
I'd just say in consideration of 30A that we're talking about duplexes, because we're mostly talking like the QFC type properties and et cetera, we would definitely not want to see anybody, even if they just wanted to burn their money and tear down QFC and put in a duplex, I don't think that'd be in the city's interest. So I would say, as you were suggesting, we wouldn't want to see that.
So then the proposal would be not to allow duplexes in R24 and within the downtown boundary. Is that correct?
That's what I'm hearing, yeah.
Can I ask one other question? I'm full of questions tonight. Somewhere in the redlining, there was the definition of a townhome. It says buildings that contain 3 or more attached single-family dwelling units was redlined, and that's the new definition. But what's the difference between a townhome then and a triplex?
To some extent, it's semantics.
Well, and that's where I'm getting at, because in the same use table, like townhomes look like they're allowed in the multi-use R1 through 6, R12, NB, downtown, but then the triplex is not that same. I'm just
So-
wondering if that needs some cleanup, maybe.
I think it probably could use some cleanup. What I would say is that a townhouse has less flexibility in its form than a triplex. I think a triplex is, so long as you can get 3 units of one structure, virtually anything would count, where a townhouse does have a little bit more of a prescribed side-by-side form. And the townhouses are typically allowed, but I believe they're allowed with conditional use.
Yeah, there's a footnote on it, P.
So this is one of the affordable housing items that we're going to be talking about later, and this was actually specifically for proposing an affordable housing consideration.
B5, so I don't know why all of that is showing up like that. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure what Microsoft Word thought I wanted to do there, but I'm not proposing to change all of those codes.
So
Well, I did want to see the review settings. I'm just not sure why I must have changed something to change something else.
Like
But
the whole table, yeah.
these tables with like marijuana laws and temporary lodging, I'm not talking about that. Those are not going to be changed. I'm sorry that they're showing up here. It's not considered a triplex.
So you're looking for
Where did that-
5?
Yeah, where is it? Only through residential facility. So this would get back to the affordable housing conversation. But traditionally, townhouses have had a conditional use permit put on them, and a conditional use permit is a land use process in its own right that is it's not very common to actually go through in Newcastle, and that's because it adds substantial risks to developers and it's not considered a reliable process in the development community, and so people do not go through it unless they feel like they have a large gain at the end potentially. And so that is why townhouses have technically been allowed in Newcastle, but in many places, but you haven't seen very many of them. because every single townhouse unit, or every single townhouse development, we need to go through that CUP process. So so the change here, and this is jumping the gun to affordability a little bit, but it would be that you could build 3 townhouses as of right if you did the affordable, if you made one of them affordable at 100% of area median income. But in other cases, it would keep that CUP requirement, because we haven't heard anything from this body that would want us to allow townhouses throughout the city. So we don't really want to change that. It's my
Okay.
very long-winded way of describing that.
Yeah, I need to chew on that one for a little bit.
Okay, let's move on.
What about the stacked units?
Well, we do have to allow stacked units as well. I don't expect that they're going to be very popular, given that under most Newcastle lots, you could build them side by side and still have sufficient space. You don't really get any extra building square footage for stacking them vertically. You also can't use the unit lot subdivision format. You'd have to condoize them, which has been.
There's also a height limitation.
There's a height limitation either way, yeah. So even if they were stacked, they're going to be under that standard 30-foot limit. So 1808-030A. Okay. Staying in that same area in the code, a use table change of 4, 5, and 6 places allowed in mixed-use neighborhood business and downtown transition zones. Okay, and 1812-030A. Okay,
Hold on a second here. Units can be attached, but if they are separate, they must be at least 5 feet between them. So what's the logic for 5 feet? And why shouldn't it be more?
so I'd hesitate to go, the only reason I would hesitate to go more is that we want to give builders and the architects flexibility to be able to make living units that actually work for the people that, that they're intended to, or for the people that are going to live there. They've already got your front, back, and side setbacks. So if we're adding a separation requirement that's greater than 5 feet, we're starting to really restrict the buildable footprint.
What will the fire department's opinion be of?
So I think they would. Oh, go ahead.
So did Crystal comment on this one? Crystal
She
is our
did.
building.
5 foot was the minimum. The building code was up with the IRS. IBC was okay with it.
IBC. So, so 5 foot was okay with our building department. I assume 5 feet will work for fire only because I've heard of them even talk about as little as 3 feet. But they will have to confirm for us.
Mhm.
Thank you.
1812-030B.12. This is the code that Mr. Given was talking about earlier. So should I go through it a little bit, or?
I just want to confirm it. This does in fact, the effect is that it allows smaller setbacks for middle housing and ADUs, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And Mr. Gibbons' question that I would like your opinion on, actually, is that if you have, we weren't planning on giving this, this bonus space, as it were, to a single family, to the main house when you have ADUs. But what about a situation where you had a main house next, contiguous with an ADU? I imagine it might look like 2 front doors facing the same cul-de-sac And would you be open with going with 5 foot and 5 foot versus, you know, the typical like adds to 15 feet? And I think the one wrinkle here is that a lot of the older houses or some of the houses in these older neighborhoods are built on cul-de-sacs where they only have 40 feet wide of frontage. That's smaller than our current standard of 50 feet, which I think is kind of the source of the problem here, that we have some of these lots that are very narrow up front.
And up until, I want to say the early 2000s, our side setbacks were 5 feet. So you still see a lot of units that were built in the 90s, even with 5 foot setbacks instead of
On side,
15.
side setback.
Yeah,
Well, just my 2 cents. I've never understood the 15 feet for single-family homes. I always thought 5 on each side would be plenty.
That is a question. Is that something that the commission would like to consider for all units?
Well, I wasn't part of the commission when the penny poll was done and all that, and neighbors were expressing concerns about Newcastle in general and in specific and all that sort of thing, but I'm curious what a neighbor's opinion might be of having the narrowed side setback. I don't know if there was ever any kind of reaction that people gave to anything like that.
That never came up that I'm aware of. I guess the way it would impact someone in existing house is if the neighbor either tore down the house and rebuilt, or if they wanted to add on something and bring their, extend their house out, they bring it within 5 feet. So think about your own house. How would you feel if your neighbor came to within 5 feet? Well, it would be 5 feet on his side and whatever you have on your side. Would that,
I guess we're all just gonna get closer.
One thing to think about too is that it does allow, so because we're not changing our zoning, so R6 minimum size lot is 6,000 square feet, and what's the other one? R4 is 7,500. So something to think about for single family is that then people are already building 4,000 square foot homes on 6,000 square foot lots. You're going to give them an additional 5 feet to put these large units next to each other if you allow it for single family homes as well. So, they're still stuck, they still have the maximum 35% building coverage, so that the unit, the buildings, the conditioned space, like anything with HVAC, can only cover 35% of an entire lot. But if you're giving them that wiggle room, we could be building very large homes with 5 foot setbacks on either side. So I'm not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is something to consider. It's just gonna allow the envelope of the building to change a bit.
So-
Also, if we change it to 5 feet, does it still need to be run by public works, or can we go ahead and?
no, that would be wholly within CD's planning's control. Here's one other thing to chew on, and this is just me thinking out loud right now, but for those would it make sense to allow this in those cases where you have a smaller non-conforming lot, specifically those lots with a 40-foot front frontage that we're not going to be making any more of? Would we want to give any extra flexibility for specifically those older lots? Those lots with a 40-foot frontage that are smaller, legal at the time, not today.
Yes.
Assuming we're trying to encourage affordable housing, it seems like the fewer restrictions that we impose, the more likely that would happen, even though it's not a likely scenario, it would make it more likely. Is that a true assessment, you think?
Yeah, I think in general, Specifically for the ADUs, the shortening of the setbacks will probably make more projects feasible than would be without them, for sure, especially on these smaller lots in the R6 zone. When you think of like your Newport Hills, like your older neighborhoods tend to have smaller lots, but sometimes still, well, not always smaller lots, but you get where I'm going.
I liked your proposal about the kind of non-conforming lot with a narrow, well, a weird shape and everything. It's exactly the situation that was presented. But conversely, I don't like the idea of giving more flexibility to somebody to come in and build a 4,000, 5,000, 6 foot, and just because they're taking advantage of that additional side. So I think what you propose makes sense to me for my vote.
And what exactly were you proposing, Tyler?
So I would propose on these lots with non-conforming frontages or non-conforming front lot line widths, that you could give, that you could make the, what is it? You can make that 10-foot side setback rule apply for a single-family house when it is specifically paired with an ADU. So when they're both on the site, and we could write that to be strict so that they need to be next to each other, or it could just be when one's on the lot, then you get the benefit.
I would give them the flexibility.
It could also apply to all lots that are legal non-conforming. And then it would give the flexibility to single family or to ADUs as long as they're non-conforming in that way.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. I need to see your wording, but I can see your wheels spinning.
I think that's good.
Would that change address Mr. Gibbons' situation?
It would.
Okay, well, looks like the commission likes that idea, so I'm sure you'll bring it back to us with wording that you think makes sense.
Will do. So, 1812-030B24, this is the same conversation with the rear setback.
But we haven't talked about the rear setback, so can we talk about it real quick?
All right, so currently rear setbacks are set at 20 feet, and then this would allow it to go down to 15 feet for accessory dwelling units when one or more accessory dwelling units will be on the lot. So it would only apply to ADUs.
Yeah, and my 2 cents on this, I'd like to see this changed to 5 feet for ADUs. But I was kind of thinking in my mind maybe of separating detached ADUs from attached ADUs. Thinking maybe if you're gonna add something to the house, like a add-on, that will be an ADU. Keep the setback maybe a little bit bigger just because it's this bulky building that gets, bigger. But if it's just gonna be a detached ADU like the one you showed in your presentation, why can't that be 5 feet from the backyard, from the back property line?
Well, there's no reason technically that it can't be. I do think that you might get some neighbors that are not happy with it. You could, if 2 people were to build, say, 2 people with lots fronting each other in the back, would each put an ADU in with 5-foot separation. There's only 10 feet between those 2 buildings, which again is totally doable.
Yeah,
from
we
a
were just
technical
talking about the
But
10
we're
feet
talking about
between.
that on the sides.
I mean, if you guys are open to it, then I'm happy to put it down. I do think there's not like a life safety reason that it couldn't be 5 feet.
Well, we had one resident speak, I don't know how many meetings ago.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
talking about he wanted to do an ADU, but the rear setback was really gonna prohibit him from being able to do it. And I'm with Paul here, I think that it could be much closer than 15, I'm not sure I would go 5, but maybe. 10 for sure, and perhaps 5 if they were able to concede something else like, I don't know, vegetation screening or other kinds of things that kind of took care of, the neighbor concern that you just kind of mentioned, so that something where there's some flexibility there, but then they're not just gonna be right in the neighbor's backyard too. But I think at least 10 feet.
Vice Chair Carlin?
I'm wondering how a particular scenario might fit in. Commissioner Van Atta gave us some material on what Tacoma had done. And I found an interesting thing in there, and they said if you've got property that's within 10 feet, to make sure that the windows were constructed so that if it was above 10 feet, that you couldn't, look right into the neighbor's property. I think that's an important consideration that we might keep in mind.
So I'm writing a note here, so then it would be like 10 foot. You could go up to 10 feet, 5 feet if windows are not facing adjacent lots? Or second story, upper story windows?
Or they made them high, daylight windows or something, so that you just weren't,
You get light.
casually walking by.
Some concession to neighbors' privacy is what
Right.
we're looking for.
Right.
So you'd say a 10-foot rear setback for ADUs in general, and then you could go down to 5 feet with these extra privacy protections in the glass, and then we would look to what Tacoma did for probably the language on that? Is that what you're thinking?
Things along those
I think
lines, yeah.
that's what we might want to keep in mind, yeah.
You can't build a fence over 6 feet, so it'd have to be something like that.
True.
Tacoma actually was specific to second-story windows within 10 feet of the shared property line, be constructed to reduce direct views into neighboring property. But I think that I don't know that we'd want to restrict it to second-story windows. You might want to have that for,
Well, I just like the notion of the wording concession to the neighbor's privacy, because I could see you could still have a window that would be like a window you'd look out, but you'd hang some sort of a device out there that's a louvered device or something, so you've provided privacy to the neighbor, but you've actually also precluded looking right at them.
You'd want something very permanent.
Yeah, it would have to be a permanent kind of an addition to the side of the building to provide that on purpose.
as you consider vegetation like hedge or something, in that situation, thank you.
Maintain vegetation, yeah.
Probably want more than vegetation if we're going to give it an approval.
Yeah, I think that could be a code enforcement issue, just because,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because then in the future, I've got to tell somebody why legally they can't cut down a bush.
Yeah.
Probably better to have it be part of the structure.
I think whether it's, if you put an ADU that's 15 feet away and it's 2 stories up, that neighbor on the other side still is going to worry about you looking down on their yard. So I think that privacy window thing could apply to, even if it's 15 feet away, it would still make sense to have the privacy.
Yeah. Can also be considered on the sides.
could consider a 10-foot, or privacy consider for 15, something for 10 foot and 5 foot if it's a single-story ADU, in which case the windows, you wouldn't think they would be any higher than the second story.
Right.
Or the fence height, unless you have lots on a hill, which a lot of people do here.
You got the gist of it.
And so you want to go down to a single story for ADUs when it's closer to 5 feet. I need to make sure that I have that right when I update the writing.
I think we need to maybe do a little research and come back next time with a proposal.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good.
1812-160. Okay, 1812-160I.
Although we were just talking about a projection.
I think some discussion on this one might be warranted, so I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what we're saying here. Because this would, typical front setback is 10 feet, so projecting into 5 feet, you're the end of your like porch might now be 5 feet from the street instead of 10. The purpose for that, to my mind, this is kind of an anti-box provision. When that people there tends to be support for like covered porches and that sort of thing, and not always the economic incentive to build them, because you're giving up that buildable area for a porch that was fundamentally a little less valuable than the living room. And so by giving them a projection setback, it makes it to where, because that's the only thing you can put there, it's now makes a little bit more sense to put that porch in on a house than maybe it was just going to be a flat front facade before. But it's 5 feet from the street instead of 10. And so I really want to flag that and get any opinions on that.
What are we currently allowed to project into the front setback? Can you want to pull up the code?
Oh, what am I? Right now, if we allow uncovered porches and decks to come 5 feet into the front, this would allow a, covered deck to also go 5 feet. So it is a little more visual impact, but I think sometimes aesthetically people like that front porch look.
Yeah. We also allowed 2 feet of eave to project into the front setback, so realistically, we're only asking about an additional 3 feet of roofing into the front setback.
Yeah, so you, okay,
Any objection to that?
just,
I have no objection, no.
okay. All right, just wanted to make sure we were all clear on that. 1818-120A1.
Just requires parking to be on the same lot. Does that make sense?
1819, oh, going too fast. Um, 1819-070 A through B. So I typically put one letter at a time on these code sections, but because these are design standards and they all kind of go together, they're more confusing apart than together. So this up to 6 units on a lot is just making sure that it's capturing any middle housing that could be built in Newcastle anywhere. Sorry, guys. So for the purpose of this street design standards conversion, so they wouldn't apply to the conversion of a structure, and then so the goals of the design standards would be to promote the compatibility of middle housing, de-emphasize garages and driveways as visual elements, and then provide clear and accessible pedestrian routes. And then the guts of what that actually means are in 1890-070 or 1819-070D. So for lots with an improved alley that meets the city's standard for width, vehicular access shall be taken from the alley. That is some state language. I know that we really don't have alleys. To the extent that if we ever did have one, I wouldn't be opposed to it. But they're so rare in Newcastle.
What was the de-emphasized garage? I don't understand what that's number two.
So there's, I guess there's sort of an aesthetic choice that if you had a duplex, would we want to have a full garage for each half of the duplex and potentially have the garage taking up a very large amount of space, just visually on the building? Or would we want to try to consolidate as best we could? That's kind of where the spirit of some of these are coming from. They're ultimately coming from the state's model ordinance. That's kind of where I use as the starting point for these.
I don't know what you mean by consolidate.
It would be, do you have one garage that handles the parking for both sides of the duplex?
So you would have one garage like down the center?
Down the
the
center, or, I mean, theoretically, it could be off to the side.
Or
and
off to
one
the
of the
side.
units just has access via an easement. Could be just as well, yeah.
Mhm, if it's subdivided,
Yeah,
okay. So all parking in the same location.
How do these standards compare to existing standards for single-family houses? So they have to be the same. Does this change things for an ordinary single-family home?
So I don't think that they would in most cases, because most single-family homes don't tend to have a driveway that goes, sorry. Most single-family homes don't tend to have a driveway that covers up 2 feet, 2/3 or more than 2/3 of the length or the width of the lot they're on. I think the original purpose of these would be to keep the driveways down closer to what you traditionally see in a single-family house. There's, some concern that we wouldn't, that putting multiple units on a lot could lead to a house that's kind of dominated by the driveway in the front aesthetically. And so this is trying to kind of come to terms with that and find a way to limit it to something that's closer to the amount of driveway that you would see coming out of a single-family house.
Any objections to this? Okay.
Okay. And now, 1819-130B. This is about our cottage housing code, which has existed since 2008, and I don't know if I've ever seen a project come out of it. So I don't really have any examples in Newcastle to point to. The current code limits the average size the average size of cottages to no more than 1,300 feet, and gives them an outright cap of 1,500 feet per set. So cottages tend to be built, or cottages are built at least 4 in a development, and these 4 smaller houses surround a common green space that kind of acts like a shared front yard. There's a type called courtyard apartments, which is the same except for the units are connected. And they more or less form a U shape. They more or less form a U shape around this common green space. And when you look at it from the street, you would see the common green space, the back unit, and then I guess the sides of the two on the end of the U. There. You see it in Kirkland has been a place where you've seen them get built more recently. But mostly you can find them in like older neighborhoods. It's a pre-war housing type that they're kind of trying to resurrect. As you can see, our attempt in 2008 did not lead to many results. And so we proposed to bring that cottage minimum or average size to 1,500 square feet. And then we would cap the biggest the cottage house could be at 1,700. Because that is in line with some advice we got from the Washington Builders Association on what might pencil and what developers might actually be attracted to doing.
Well, are these all presumed to be single-story or Rambler style or something?
They would have the same height limits that our single-family houses do, and that we would have to allow that because it's a type of middle housing, and we're not allowed to. That would be one of those design requirements that we can't make more restrictive. Aaron?
Although it allows more than 2 units.
It does allow more than 2 units because our current code does.
Right, because I thought there was a height restriction on cottage housing currently. Do you
I
have
believe
the-
that we're going to have to get rid of that height restriction and synchronize it with single-family detached.
Even though it's outside of our state requirement, we might need to look at that.
We could check on that and see what the bounds are, and then we could keep the height requirement if we are allowed to.
Unless it's a
I was
moot
just thinking
point.
that 1,700 square feet is starting to get a reasonable-sized Rambler, actually.
Well-
So, but unless it's two-story, and if it's two-story, then it's still kind of compact, and that's what I think more as a cottage.
Well, they likely would be 2 stories just because you're trying to get, at least 4 on a lot. I think that is what you would see, just because that's what would be economical and what would fit on the site. And the 1,500 to 1,700 square feet is sort of a lost building size. When we get new buildings, new single-family residents, they tend to be often, 2 to 4,000 square feet. 3,000 is really probably, and up is the most common around here now. And so we're proposing to keep accessory dwelling units at 1,000 square feet. And so then this would kind of fit in the middle with the hope that they might be this size might be your like 3-bedroom home. So that was the ultimate goal there with that square footage.
Is that okay, by the way? Yep, okay.
Okay, 1808-030B-19. This is avoiding a technicality. It makes sure that we're not going to allow, it limits the size of what can be built on there to the, ADU size caps, not to just split the total buildable area by 3, which would be a larger structure. 1818-120B. Okay. 2009-010A, this would be a new code section for unit lot subdivisions, put in the, as part of our code that handles short plats and subdivisions. 2009-030F, not sure why we got slash. that is the last one that's not affordable housing. So I guess I'd like to ask everyone if we want to power through or what the commission is feeling like.
Part of this is a question about how we complete our work in time to have something, right? We're only about a quarter of the way through all of the code sections that are in this spreadsheet. So I guess I don't want to quit now. It's actually kind of a short meeting if we quit now compared to what we've been used to. But if the commission is willing to go till 9 o'clock, I think we should keep going. What do you think? Why don't we do that now? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay keeping going. I will say though, once you get past the quality section for me, I didn't have much, most of the requirements were cut and dried for me. I don't know how the others felt, but.
Good. Well, let's take a 5-minute break then, and that means be back here at 8:01.
Hey, Mike, can you hear us? We're going to move on to affordable housing next.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, how do we do that? I don't know how to do that. Oh, no, because it's not in Zoom, it's in YouTube. I assume you're going back to this.
Yeah, we're gonna.
I think we're ready to resume.
All right, everybody. I have a mouse that's here somewhere. Oh, there we go. So, I'd like to talk about affordable housing right now. It's different from all of the other code updates that we'll be looking at, in that we're not required by a state law to do this. But in fact, we're kind of leveraging the state laws are giving us a window of opportunity that we could do it if we wanted to. If we were not going to upzone at all, we would not have the opportunity to consider this. And so while we are going to upzone because of state law, we wanted to see what the appetite was while the window was open. And so I think this should be a little bit more of a discussion about what people are thinking and what they want in a big picture sense. because we have flexibility to do more, less, none, however, that it is all going to be fully on the table for this section. So some of the possibilities of what we could do would be requiring fees for affordable housing, requiring a portion of new housing to be affordable in a new development. That's known as inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing. It can be a way to get deed-restricted affordable units either on the site or by using the money that you get from those units to build them off-site. Affordable housing policy can be a little bit of a tricky thing because there's a balance between the requirements that you set for the goals for your program and having it still meet the developer's financial goals so that development is still desirable because we obviously don't want to choke off production. And so that balance is key for a successful affordable housing policy.
Tyler, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Will this be subject to public hearing at some point?
Oh, yes.
For public input so that they have a chance to weigh in?
There'll be a public hearing at our next meeting,
Thank you.
and the meeting after that likely as well. So it's good that we go through this now because that'll give people an opportunity at our next meeting to
Right.
comment.
I agree. I just want to make sure the public had a say in it. That's where I get my input from.
Yes, I don't think that we could skip a public hearing on something like this in our code, and also just from a good governance standpoint, I think it'd be important to move through that, so.
I agree. Thank you.
So, while I have 8 proposed code changes in the code change tracker, they're really in support of 2 main ideas that each could have some variations on, or have different parts of them, and so there's some opportunity for variation. The first one would be that developers must make 10% of units in all proposed developments affordable to households making 80% of area median income, which this is called, another word for this is workforce housing. When you hear people talking about like school teachers and firefighters and police officers, that's 80%, or at least well-known trades that are in that bracket. So what I'm proposing here would be that when you calculate that 10% of units, that if 10% includes whole numbers, then any whole numbers would have to be built on site. And then for percentages that are under 66%, then it can be either covered on site with a new unit, or it could be with a fee in lieu. And then for percentages 66% and over, they could be covered with a fee in lieu, or actually, I was thinking maybe with an affordable accessory dwelling unit. So an ADU that could be saleable or rentable, but it would be deed restricted, affordable. The fee in lieu, the kind of working number that we had last I checked would be $13 a square foot. That was thanks to our friends at Arch. I had Mike Stanger, who is, that's a lot, who has actually joined us and is with us now, did some modeling for us to get to that 13 feet. And so, Mike, I'm not going to put you on the spot right this second, but in the next few minutes, just know I'd like, if you have anything to say on that and the process that got there, I'd appreciate it. So
It's good.
Okay. $13 per square foot would be the in lieu fee. And then another policy, which is really separate from the first one, would be, yeah?
I don't even know if I get policy 1, just to be frank. So what do you mean by whole numbers?
Okay, so say you want to do 10% of units should be affordable, and somebody comes up with a 12-unit lot, so that would be 1.2 affordable units. So that one onto the site, and then the 0.2 could either get, could be a second unit built on site, but more likely would get paid off
In the fee in
as
lieu.
a fee in lieu. Or say you had 9 units, and then they could either do like a fee in lieu up to, for the 0.9, or they could do maybe like a deed restricted affordable ADU on their site.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Are the funds generated by fee in lieu restricted funds or dedicated to a particular, place in the budget?
Well, I think that what we would want to do would be to give them to Arch, but to have them earmarked for projects in Newcastle. But there is openness on that. It's not, it's not a requirement that we do it that way. But Arch does have organizational capacity beyond what we have in the city, both as far as coming up with projects on the development side, and just the record keeping is sturdier than what we have set up to handle at City Hall right now. So having it go to Arch, but be earmarked first for affordable housing projects in Newcastle would probably be the way we'd want, or that I would suggest we go about it.
Since we had the Arch representative here most recently, have we ever gotten information back from them about what our financial, our monetary contributions to them have actually given us credit for? No, probably not.
Mike, do you have that information by any chance? Probably not in front of you.
I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but I will be happy to try and get that for you as soon as possible.
Well, but the point is that we will get some credit for that at some point. We just don't maybe have the accounting yet. In other words,
Absolutely.
ideally, it benefits Newcastle directly in terms of dwellings here in Newcastle. Secondarily, at least we get the credit for it with the state requirement, but
That's right.
Tyler, just going back to what you said earlier about these options on this slide, we don't have to do any of these, or we could do some form of them, is that right?
That's correct. Mix and match to your heart's content. We have full flexibility here. On everything, really everything you see here.
I do.
So one question, then, a more fundamental question for us is, do we want to do anything that incents affordable housing? Because each of these things has an impact on somebody.
Charlie?
Yep.
I'm sorry. May I say something though first?
Sure.
I just want to remind the commission that if we don't do anything, we're at status quo. And status quo is not having developers take advantage of our affordable housing density incentives. It's paying in lieu fees when the downtown is developed. And that's all we really have right now. And so it doesn't further our efforts or help contribute to the new state housing mandates. So even though we don't have to do this, it is voluntary, there are good reasons to follow through with it.
And one good reason is we want there to be more affordable housing in Newcastle. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that if we want to have more affordable housing in Newcastle, we have to do something different than what we're doing now. And it's likely to be, it may not be these things here, but it's got to be something that is going to have a cost. It's going to put a cost on somebody, either a financial cost or a change that they might complain about. So, the fundamental question is, do we want to really do anything to encourage more affordable housing units in Newcastle. We're not required to do this. The state isn't saying you got to do any of these things. It really comes down to what we want to do for our city. Commissioner Blocker.
In the same vein, and I'm probably jumping ahead too far, but step housing, is it all required?
That is a requirement, yes.
So we're going to get step housing anyway. It seems like we might as well have the entire housing program at some level. That is to say, I guess I'm partially in support of beginning at some level with affordable housing.
I want to ask Tyler to clarify. We're not required to have any step housing. What we're required to do is to make sure we don't have anything that discourages it.
Right. The key word is accommodate for step housing. So we're not going to, the city isn't going to bring a developer in and say, here, you must build step housing, and there's not somebody from the Office of Step Housing that's going to come in and build step housing. But there is, what we do have to do is to make it legally possible for someone to come in and build it.
What does that mean? What would what we're talking about in the codes we've just spent an hour or so talking about, what part of that wouldn't allow step housing?
I think it would mostly be a use table change. We've put in the definitions of what the different acronyms of step housing, shelters, transitional facilities, emergency housing, etc. Put those in the use table. We put P's next to their name in the downtown requirements, and then or in the downtown zone, and then I look for any definitions of something. I look for anything in the code right now that explicitly bars that, and get rid of that particular provision, and that would be it. That's why the number of code changes for step housing was so small on that pie earlier.
Vice Chair?
These provisions or these accommodations seem to work at cross purposes. I mean, realistically, a developer is going to pay the in lieu fee rather than build an affordable unit. It just pencils out better for them in general. And the in lieu fee then adds to the price of the builder's not going to eat that. He's going to pass it on to the purchaser. And so the purchaser, you're trying to make things affordable, but you've added more expense to this affordability. So these things are, I'm having trouble figuring out how we make these things work. If we really want affordable housing, this isn't particularly conducive to that, because it actually increases the housing, and the builder's going to want to build the maximum big fancy house that he can rather than address the affordable housing issue. So how do we come to terms with what our overall goal is, and how do we accommodate that?
Well, it's a good question, and that is a concern that people have raised about inclusionary zoning as a policy over the years, and the general response for addressing that has been, and this is why the state code doesn't allow you to put these limits, doesn't allow you to impose these limits without any give back to the developer, essentially through an upzone, is that it becomes a balance, that when you provide new housing, that the value of that give is not going to be exceeded by the value of the take. So that on net, we are not making it harder, or on net, we're not making it a worse proposition to build housing in the city. Because the extra benefit that they get from being able to build more than they could before is only partially offset by the affordability need. And that is where getting the exact amount that you're asking for in terms of the level of affordability, the percentage of units that need to be affordable, and the amount of the in lieu fees all comes into play. Those three things are kind of the fulcrum that this policy balances on, so to speak. And I'm about to go off into some deep place right now, so I'm going to stop.
I'd also just like to add, it seems to me that it might be advisable to not make any final decisions until Commissioner O is here to have some input into it, because she was really in-depth up to her neck in the details of this sort of thing, and it just makes sense that instead of just carte blanche saying we approve, that we maybe reserve our judgment until Commissioner O has a chance to weigh in.
I don't think we're going to make any decision until we make a recommendation to the council, but I don't think, I don't want us to not discuss our preferences until Commissioner Lowe gets here.
Right, thank you.
So, our work has to continue whether a commissioner can make it to a meeting or not. Commissioner Blocker.
Tyler, could you, I didn't entirely understand everything you did say, because you talked about the balance on the fulcrum of upzoning, so that, I'm not sure, is that existent in the code already, that they can get an upzone, they can build one more unit if they're willing to make that unit be affordable, or something? Is that something that you're saying?
So that concept exists in our code right now, but only in the downtown area. It only really applies to multifamily, like, mid-rise multifamily dwellings.
Like this next door?
So actually, we do have incentives for building additional
Well, that's
affordable
true.
units. Yeah.
We do have an affordable housing incentive now that lets you build, sorry, I'll stop.
Yeah, go ahead. But I just wanted to stop because we
Wondered.
do actually have, we have an affordable housing incentive in our code that allows you to build additional density on a lot. Like say you're doing a subdivision, there are different incentives, by building trails, preserving historic buildings, and one of them is building affordable housing. And you get so much more density for so many affordable housing units,
In what zones?
all zones.
R1 through 6?
Yeah.
The catch has been that the code has not been, that code provision has not been popular to use. And so I think you could probably fairly say that the amount of benefit offered is not coming close to the cost incurred by the developer, or we would have seen someone take us up on it by now.
I don't see what currently exists. So you're saying if there was a vacant lot up here on the hill behind us, a single-family lot, how would they get an incentive for more density prior to ADUs and everything else that's coming down the trail?
Well, on one lot, they wouldn't, but imagine if you had somebody had been living here for a long time and they had a tract of a couple acres and they wanted to subdivide that land. They could, I think in exchange for making one of the units affordable at 80% of AMI, they, instead of being able to divide their land into like 11 units, they might be able to divide it into 13 units. And that would be the scale of the trade-off. And it seems like that the cost of the requirement is probably not equaling the benefit that the requirement is giving, just based on the lack of uptake.
But one of the requirement options was one unit was going to be affordable or some such, or trail building or building restoration or something. I didn't get all that.
So that whole section of code is called residential density incentives. And there are different types. Some have to do with parks and trails, some have to do with affordable housing, and some have to do with historic preservation in the city.
I've got it pulled up here now. So the benefit would be, where'd you go? It's a little bit confusing because it says bonus units per benefit unit. The bonus unit is not exact, in this case, it's not exactly like an extra unit of housing. It's extra, it's extra density you get to build on the site. Basically lets you make the lots a little bit smaller. And by making the lots a little bit smaller, eventually you get to build an additional one with the space you saved. That's the general structure of that affordable housing benefit as it's written today. That other one down there would, in red, is the next one that we haven't spoken to yet, and it's structured differently, so we'll talk about that later.
So all that said and done, we haven't had anybody take us up on it.
Not that we've had townhome developments, I believe, take us up on that, but not in the single-family type.
So like, I think we got one out of the Lake Bourne townhomes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So do we have an option to continue to keep that code instead of changing to
Oh, sure.
the
Yeah,
proposed code?
yeah, that's certainly on the table.
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity to expand or adjust our code to potentially capture more interest.
Are we, a rhetorical question, are we concerned with actually making affordable housing here, or are we just trying to keep the state happy with these requirements? I mean,
That was the question I posed to you earlier. We don't have to do any of these.
Right.
The question is, do you want to do something about affordable housing that makes a difference? I think that's the real question, because these aren't state requirements.
I'm going to sound like something that I don't want to sound like, but as we get to step housing, where we're going to be required, well, I guess we're not required to provide it. We just have to, we're required to allow that it could happen. So, and I know that there's a great concern, I think, from my neighbors and the neighborhood, that the character and nature of Newcastle remain as it is. And I think there's a perception, whether it's faulty or not, that some of these other kinds of things might change the actual character and nature of Newcastle. So I don't want to sound like one of those people that get called all kinds of names in this day and age, but I think our neighbors would like Newcastle to stay like Newcastle.
in general, I agree with that. The less regulations, the less new stuff that we impose on the people, and that's why I think that the public hearing is critical. But in general, if it's not required, and the true benefits seem a little bit nebulous to me. So I appreciate the chair's question. Is that do we really want to even consider this, or should we just leave things at the status quo and just meet the minimum requirements that the state is asking?
I think that was my question, but it really wasn't, do we want to make the minimums? The question is, what do you personally want to do about affordable housing? Because if we don't adapt anything, we're not going to see any change in affordable housing. So it's not, I'm not saying, do we want to just, keep the minimum? I'm really challenging us to think about, what do we want to do about making more housing that's affordable available in Newcastle? And these are some of the options that we could pursue.
And when you say we, I'm more interested in what the public thinks than what I think. I've had to support unpopular decisions in the past because that's what the public told me they wanted. And then, I become the lightning rod for that. So I want to make sure that when we're talking about that we get as much outreach and as much public input as possible, so that, the worst thing in the world is when a situation arises and you get well, nobody told me about this response. And so as much as we can avoid that, whatever it takes, I think that needs to be a primary driving factor on what we as a commission decide. I mean, again, we serve the people, and so what the public wants has got to be a pretty high factor in the decisions that we decide on.
Well, I have kind of a proposal, and which is, I think we are all responsible citizens and we care for our fellow people in the world. So I think the notion that housing affordability is very important because it's not very affordable anymore. I think the city of Newcastle, I think we should move towards seeking some more affordable housing if we can. I don't think we're going to be able to be, just by virtue of the amount of land in the city, I don't think we're going to be able to come up with huge amounts of affordable housing, but I think we could move towards it. I don't think that would be, I think most people would be supportive of that, at least to some degree. But I really am of the opinion that I would like, as Vice Chair suggested, that we have a public hearing coming the next commission meeting, and our other fellow commissioner will be back. I would like to just kind of propose that tentatively we would move towards adoption of some of this, but let's not make it locked in so that we can circle back and discuss it again, like at the next meeting.
Yeah, I think the opportunity we have tonight is to better understand these so that when we leave this meeting, we can talk about them in a more informed way. I don't think we should be voting on these tonight, but we should take the opportunity. We have a person from Arch on the phone, and we have Tyler and Aaron here to really think, if we have questions about this, what is it? What are the implications? Let's talk about that so that we can bring this conversation to the people that we have contact with.
Well, that's one more, excuse me, but that's one more additional point, that the Arch situation, I suppose, is good for Newcastle because it gives us others that we're in league with, but I'd really like to see the benefits of the affordable units land here in Newcastle as opposed to Timbuktu.
It's not like you're taking a quiet street where children are playing and bringing traffic or density. And so to me, it's something that I think
think parking, as long as adequate parking is provided, along with the increase in density, I think it makes total sense.
Those areas were fairly limited, like, southeast 95th and probably May Creek Road and, well, Coal Creek if there was a lot to do it on. So, yeah, for the limited amount of areas that would be appropriate, I think that's a fine use of policy.
Well, we had a map in the PowerPoint, but the consideration was, one of the questions we had on that was at what percentage income? Because we don't have to use 80, we can use 90, we can use 100, knowing that 100% of the area median income is still $160,000 a year for a household. And that doesn't buy a $2 million home, so just something to think about while you're talking about it.
I would say if we are making that provision, we should probably stay with 80%, only because it'll just be casting a wider net then for families to afford it, so yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'll wonder out loud. I'm wondering, not to be contradictory, but I'm wondering if maybe in something like that, where you then have a townhouse situation, maybe still a 3-bedroom or something adequate to hold a family, maybe it would warrant going to less than 80% for the worker situation, what was the term earlier?
Workforce?
Workforce.
Workforce, yeah, workforce. So that it actually would be trying to support to some extent the workforce of the actual community. So that, I don't know what all the thresholds were. There was 80 and wasn't there 50% or something?
Yeah, I mean, common thresholds can be 80, 60, 50, and 30%, and each of those requires different things. 80, in this market in particular, you really start needing significant subsidy once you get below 80%, and even at 80%, you probably often do need some subsidy in this market. If we were in Houston, you could probably do 80% market, but
That would be a place we could put some of the in lieu fees back.
yeah. Yeah, that is potentially one thing you could do with it. I do think if you go lower than 80%, then I think there's despite not having seen the numbers, just from having watched development for a while, I think your uptake might be very low. And at 80 or 100%, I think you would have more luck. It could be something that one could model, actually. Mike, are you still there? I don't want to put a big ask on you now, just out of the blue. But would it be much effort to model the feasibility of having a 3-unit townhouse development with one of the units available at 80 or 100% of AMI, and try to get a sense of whether that would be feasible or not? I know I may have just asked for a big thing, so please feel free to tell me to go away.
He's still there.
He's there, I see him. But I don't hear him. Why don't I?
We don't
You
either.
might need to
Mike,
sign into VIA. Do you know how to do that?
I do not.
Hey, real quick.
One second, Mike, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Oh, is it?
So, I haven't said much. So I think trying to find a way to make more affordable housing is the right goal to have. I struggle though with like what this proposal actually means. Like I would love to see this actually put into numbers. Like what's $13 per square foot mean to the cost of a house? Like,
I can tell you that. If it's a $1 million house, it's about $26,000 more.
and is that a deal breaker for a developer? This is where I just don't.
Probably not for developers. A question, again,
I
really.
mean, it's gonna get passed on to the consumer.
Yeah, I guess the way of looking at it is, do you want to make a house $26,000 more affordable to a market buyer in order to make something more affordable somewhere else? It's,
Yeah, that's
the
right.
developer's, I think, going to be neutral about it. It's really that buyer that is paying the price.
Yeah, I don't know. Even like when you talk like 80% or 100%, like, what's that actually mean? Like, does 80% of AMI, what is that number? Is that, 80,000, 100,000? What is that actual number? And then can that turn into an actual mortgage that somebody could afford? I don't know. I need data, I guess.
Maybe this is for Tyler.
160,000.
How are these, how's affordability preserved? I mean, if you build an affordable unit, is it an affordable unit in perpetuity, or would the person sells it, and now the treasurer down, the assessor down at King County is gonna say, oh, goody goody, we've got this unit now and we can get market rate for it. How do we assure that this affordability is sustained on a given unit?
Yeah, so we would do that with a deed restriction. There are affordable housing programs out there that, especially like land bank programs, that will make it affordable for the first person, and then that's it. But that's not really what we propose to do here, and those have fallen out of popularity for reasons I think you can imagine.
Turnover quick.
Yeah, it's affordable for one person at one time. So we would have a deed restriction on these to guarantee that. And I think that those deed restrictions are actually something that Arch can keep records of, which is another way that they can be, that they're useful.
Well, they probably cap or limit the amount of equity growth or something before, per
Yeah,
period of time or something.
Yeah, you would probably have the deed say that it needs to be written to be affordable at a certain percent of area median income, and that might go on to say the like where that AMI number that you tie into is. Traditionally, that's been the federal government Department of Housing and Urban Development has kept this AMI data up for all of the metro regions in the country, and then separately for rural areas. And so people tend to tie back into that federal data. So that's how your deed restriction would keep it affordable over time while acknowledging that, yes, people make more money over time, so the real dollar amount of this house is going to go up. It's just going to go up in line with people's
Still
incomes.
proportional.
Yeah.
Mike can hear us. Mike, can you try talking? You might have answers to some of these questions that have just come up.
I'm talking now. I don't know if you can hear me.
Aaron, you're a genius, thank you.
I've also got my camera on.
We can see your camera and we can hear you now. This,
Oh, okay, great.
great.
Hello.
So, let's see, I think the first thing that we had asked you that you were in the process of answering when we realized we couldn't hear you, was whether or not it would be feasible to model whether we could have a 3-unit townhouse built in a land that would, otherwise just allow a duplex. And at either 80 or with one of those units affordable, either at 80 or 100% of AMI, and see if that would be likely to get developer interest or not.
Yes, we could definitely do that analysis for that, and we could also prepare, and present other scenarios if you'd like to see them, including, and be able to explain how the developer or builder manages to pay for it with the residual profits on the project and still keep a feasible project. I heard some other questions about what does an 80 home affordable at 80% median cost, and who can pay for it, and how is that administered over time, and things that we can address all of those things. I don't know if your schedule allows for us to come back at a future meeting to do that, but I'd be more than happy to prepare that.
So we have meetings in April and May. So May is our tentative recommendation, depending on where we are in the process. But I don't know if, what type of timing you're looking for that, but we can talk about that.
Were you asking me that question?
Yeah, does that seem reasonable? Sorry.
To come back in April?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Were there other questions about the use of in lieu fees, earmarking them for Newcastle projects, recycling them into the affordable housing incentives? Have you seen a jurisdiction do that, Mike, where they take the in lieu fee and then apply them for sort of incentive type projects?
If you mean to like a mixed income project that's otherwise, doesn't have any funding, public funding, I can't think of one that has done that, but that question's been brought up in Kenmore as well. And I wouldn't say it couldn't be done. It might be possible to buy down the rents in another, or the purchase prices in some other project that way. What we typically do is either the city will deposit the in lieu fees into the Arch Trust Fund, and then the city can decide at any time what project to devote that money to, either in their community or in another community. I should mention that, over time, the whole concept of the trust fund is that over time that the money that Newcastle contributes may go out to other communities, but those communities are also going to end up funding and subsidizing projects within Kenmore as well. And we could show how that's happened in the past. The other thing that has happened on occasion is that Kirkland is the one who most often takes in lieu fees in smaller amounts, but they may have a project in the works that they need subsidy for right then, and rather than putting it into the trust fund, they'll tell us to invest it in this other project that's already on the board, so to speak. And so it goes directly to those projects within the community. And either way is fine with us.
Trust fund kind of is synonymous with slush fund. And as long
Beg your pardon?
as trust fund is kind of synonymous with slush fund, which is fine as long as we get some of the slush back to Newcastle sometimes to benefit buildings that we would like to see be affordable to residents in Newcastle.
That's the principle.
Let's go back to your slide, Tyler, that had options. So I think we gave you some feedback on option 2 that I think was generally favorable. We've been talking about option 1 to some degree. One of the things we've been talking about is the $13 per square foot fee, and I mentioned comes out to be something around $26,000 for $1 million house, $52,000. Well, let me ask commissioners, how does that sound to you? Does that sound like that's a punitive, or maybe punitive isn't the right word? Is that an amount that you think is excessive to ask to be passed on to a new home buyer in order to afford, make some housing that's affordable available elsewhere? Would you rather see a different fee than that?
My math is not good, but how much a month on a 30-year mortgage do you think that would add?
I don't know, but I don't know. I mean, I had a car loan, a cheap car loan for, around $30,000, and my payment was $500 a month. And that was like a 3% interest rate, so it's probably, maybe it adds $1,000 a month. I don't know, oh yeah, 5-year loan, that's right. Thank you for correcting that. That seems, so for $1,000 a month, if it was a 5-year loan, if it's a 30-year loan, maybe it's only, $50 a month.
And also that would be spread, so this would be 4 or more units, I think is the proposal. Is that correct, Tyler?
Yeah, so I did want to get to points 3 and 4 here, because they do affect number 1, and that would be that units smaller than 1,600 feet and developments totaling less than 4 units would be exempt from these requirements, with the idea being that those smaller projects tend to be, when the square footage is small, that's tend to be a little more affordable in the first place, so we really don't want to work counter to ourselves. And then second, for those smaller number developments a larger proportion of those tend to be people like putting ADUs in their own backyards or redeveloping so that like family can live nearby, or like kind of smaller time developers. And so the point, so that is why that carve out is there. Just to try to keep the burden, or the burden associated with larger profit-seeking projects that are more likely to have the means and like technical capability to model it out and make sure that it works for them. If that makes sense.
So then you would be dividing that fee that you were talking about amongst 4 or more units. In theory.
So that makes that fee seem less onerous, a $13 per square foot fee seem less onerous. So imagine yourself now after the meeting, you go home, you're talking to your next door neighbor about this. Do you feel like you could describe this proposal adequately?
2 questions. So if a developer makes a unit affordable, what does that mean? So there's four, so it's a fourplex, one's affordable.
So,
Like,
one,
what's the selling price of that versus not the other three?
right, so that one that's marked affordable, say it's at 80% of AMI would, and Mike, please feel free to jump in if I'm wrong at any point here, but that one that's earmarked as affordable would get a deed restriction on it that would say that essentially that it needs to be affordable to somebody making no more than 80% of the area median income. Affordable means paying no more than 30% of the gross take-home, or the gross pay that 80% of area median income gets. So you take that, you take the 80% of AMI like amount that generally comes from federal government, Department of Housing and Urban Development is the data keeper.
Yeah.
And then you take 30% of, 30% of that, and then that monthly fee or monthly rate becomes what can be paid for the house. So then from that monthly rate, you work backwards to get the price of the house. And the price of the house then adjusts in the future with whatever the income is based off of is.
But can we get those numbers in a table or something? Because that's also a cost that the builder will absorb, right? I mean, if he's got, just easy math here, 3 units that are $1 million each, but that fourth one he can only sell for $750,000. That he just lost
Oh, yeah.
$250,000.
So if we were to do the math backwards, if I'm understanding correctly, our average median income in Newcastle, you said is 160,000, is that correct?
Yeah, something similar to that.
So 80% of that would be 128,000. Somebody with a salary of 128,000 annually would be able to afford. And then so that's going to be 30% of that is what we're looking at, and that's like 38,400 divided by 12 is 3,200 a month. Is that how we are looking at it?
Yep, and then you work back now we go back the other direction from 3,200 to the implied value of the house.
And then Arch has people who are applying and waiting in line, looking for homes like this to be able to buy. We were told that when they made the
Yes.
presentation.
So this would, because this fee would only apply to developments of 5 or more units.
Well, 4 or more, but
4 or more?
we could make it 5.
No, okay, but, so 4 or more units. What would you say is the potential in Newcastle for there to be 4 or more unit developments? How many more of those are there out there? Do we have a sense of that?
Oh, just a sense of like the land availability?
Yeah.
I mean, a number, especially now that we have middle housing coming in. I mean, you would need, to get to 4 units, you need about 15,000 probably more like 17,000 square feet of land. So you
So
either
we
have,
were talking about current residents along arterials. Would there be situations where those could sell and they'd get redeveloped for one of these? Or was that?
sure. I think it's a good question. I'd imagined that these 2 programs would be either or, that if you did the 3 townhouse on an arterial situation, that then you would be taking that route and not the fee in lieu route, but it would be up to the city whether or not it would, you could do both programs at the same time. But I had imagined it as an either or situation. But I don't know that it has to be that way.
I was just thinking, going back to the question about how much availability is there, I think we could look at how many buildable lots are left in Newcastle that are an acre or more. Um,
Well, and one thing you're probably also going to see over time is some redevelopment in some of the city's older neighborhoods that have buildable lots with smaller houses on them. When you see that happen today, you usually are seeing one like 4,000 square foot house go in where there used to be like a 1,400 square foot house. So I think that process will slowly continue over time. It's a little hard to model exactly how fast it will go, but it would be a lot by lot situation over a long period of time. But rather than the one 4,200 square foot house today, you're probably going to see two, two duplexes or two halves of it, one duplex with 2 units, I should say. And as far as the number of lots that could take 4 units, there's a decent number. It's hard for me to say off the top of my head. I would need to do an analysis, but there is land like this. Most commonly, it would be a large piece of land that might just have one house on it that's like 15,000, 17,000 square feet. There is also potential in some cases maybe to do like a 2-lot assemblage. I don't know how the numbers would work on that, but yeah, we would need to do an analysis to get a good number on it. I know that there are projects out there, but it's hard for me to put a pin on it right now.
I was asking not really to get a number, but to get a notion of how many people this would impact, and whether it's a big number or a small number.
Oh, well.
I mean, it seems like most of the city is developed, so it's not going to be a widespread impact.
No, I wouldn't expect it to be a widespread impact. I would imagine honestly that the townhouse situation might have the potential for more, just because there are a lot of lots there, and you're generating an affordable unit for essentially each project. And we know that there are some older houses that you can find along 76, along 116th that have decent size, that have decent amount of land or decent lot size with them. I still think you're probably looking at, less than 100 affordable units, because you need a significant amount of redevelopment to get over 100. It would put you on a trajectory where you would probably add small amounts of affordable units fairly consistently, though, kind of a drip, 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 where today we don't really get much of any.
For our next meeting, do you think you could find some pictures of 3-unit townhouses?
Sure.
Because I think it'd be interesting we may have, might be helpful to show those to people who are here with us or online at the public hearing, what that would look like. It's 9:07. Tyler, I don't know what other slides you haven't shown us, but I'm wondering if this is a good point for us to call an end to this part of the meeting.
Yeah,
Aaron?
so this is all of my slides. They're done. And yeah, this would be a perfectly fine time to move on, I think.
What do you think, commissioners? Are you ready to move on? Okay.
Well, and Mike, appreciate you being here and sitting tight with us while we worked through kicking a cord. So yeah, thanks again for coming out and for your technical expertise.
Yeah, my pleasure. A lot of good questions raised. I look forward to helping you find answers on those.
All right. Thanks.
We will move to additional public comment, but I just wanted to add one little factoid to our AMI conversation. 160,000 is 100% AMI. I think you said 128 is 80%. A teacher in Washington State, depending on what website you go to, the average teacher salary is about $80,000. But teacher salaries range from like 50,000 to 100,000. And the $128,000 is household income. So if there were two income earners, and they were both teachers, or one was a teacher, the other was a cop, they would be able to afford that 80% AMI. Okay. We will now have our second public comment period. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak? Please approach the podium, tell us your name and where you live. Your mic is not on. There you go.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
would you
My name is
repeat that?
Heidi. My name is Heidi Dean. I live in Newport Hills in Bellevue, and we are at least 6 months further out on this than you are because of our comp plan. And I saw you were talking about this, and I wanted to come over and talk about some of the points made. Middle housing is what we're discussing right now. And let me just go back to the fact that you don't have to accept what's going on. Going with the model code is not scary. While you can ask for an extension from the state, while you craft a middle housing code that works for Newcastle and still complies with the state, and that doesn't mean that you have to stay with the model code after that, because once you adopt the revised code, it reverts to that. So I just wanted you to know that, because what our staff in Bellevue, they were not telling people that. They weren't even telling our council members that. So, PIN. Don't forget about the lot splitting bill, 1096, that's probably going to pass this year, because everything that happens that you're looking at will be impacted by that. So double everything that you're looking at doing that's being proposed to you, and double that. You take that single family lot, it gets split, and then each of those lots can do what's being proposed. PIN. Affordable housing, because watch out, in Bellevue, nobody ever takes the fee in, or they pay the fee in lieu. They do not build the affordable housing. And I want to go to Arch, because how long has Newcastle been paying into the Arch Fund? And what have you actually got out of it? You haven't had anything since the late 1990s, when they built the Habitat for Humanity 12 units on Golf Course Road. My friend Jana lives there. So exactly when would they be, why, do you really think you're going to get anything out of it now? You're not. And also, do not forget that Arch got caught not administering you asked about perpetuity. They weren't monitoring that. They had that big scandal in 2018. So the idea was someone who sells to a developer who will build a triplex will get more for their house. No, they won't. So you get a developer that buys that house, and then they turn around and they build all these units. And you know what happens is that the property taxes go up on that lot, as well as all of the lots around it, because here in King County, the land value is based on what you can build, not what's actually built there. So, oh gosh, there is so much. Density. That is a pre-2008 concept. Density as affordability. You need to talk to our legislatures, because they are passing failed bills from other states. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment?
Hello, my name is Stephen Vimes. I live in the Walker's Run condominium complex. I've been hearing a lot of talk about 80% AMI, and I kind of want to give a little bit better image of what that looks like in terms of like solid numbers. So me and my wife, we make about $110,000 a year. That's well below 80%. We are very lucky to rent a condo from Peggy Price, and that is well below market rate. If we were to try to buy that condo, we would not be able to afford it. It would be about it's between $450,000 to $500,000, depending on how like the detached garage gets associated with the price. That at a 10% down payment is roughly like $4,000 a month, and would not be affordable to anybody under 80% or even at 80% AMI. So I just want to give that kind of number to everybody who's curious. So thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Planning calendar is, would you remind us what the date of our next meeting? Fourth Wednesday in April is?
First one to it wins. Is the 4th, the 23rd.
April 23rd.
Yes, commissioners win. So. I think it was Stuart Blocker who I heard first. Beat me to it.
Any other dates that we should be aware of?
Not at the moment. Something to think about is as we get into the year further, are just vacation schedules for the summer and if there's going to be any dates that are going to be missed. I will let you know that the council set their town hall meeting for May 7th. So if you want to put that in your calendars.
Okay, well, that takes us to the end of our agenda. We are adjourned.
Thank you.